Okay, this is my sort of guide to doing time-lapse on the cheap with a webcam. And for comparison, I'm going to compare it to what I used last year, which is a fairly expensive digital SLR camera. This is actually a 40D, Canon 40D. And they come in at about $1,000 for the body and $500 for a cheap lens. Now these are actually quite good for astrophotography as well. But last year I used these for doing the time-lapse. So you need something called an intervalometer, which will cost you between about $50 and $150. And what this does is it'll take a picture every so many seconds. This setup is actually really useful for the astrophotography as well, in that I can set this up to take 30-second exposures every 30 seconds or something. So that takes a lot of the donkey work out. However, this has lots of disadvantages for doing time-lapse, especially if driving, in that the camera is an absolute prick, weighs a ton. It's big, it's clunky, it's awkward, it's very difficult to put it on the dashboard and feel safe. You know, if you're going to be driving around with this on the dashboard, you've sort of got to take it down every time you sort of stop, otherwise it's just an invitation. The memory cards have come on a long way since I did this last year, so this is up to 16 gig now. But last year I was doing them on 2 and 4 gig cards, and they filled up on a fairly regular basis. The smallest pictures this thing can take are about 2 megabytes a piece. Battery is another bugaboo, in that the batteries on this will only last about half a night, about 4 hours. So you need a spare battery and you need to charge one whilst the other one's being used. Now, advantages is you get a nice wide-angle lens, which is great for scenery. Now you get a bit of you've got a choice here. With the wide angle, if you're driving through big scenery on both sides, you need a wide-angle lens to capture it. However, with small mountains in the distance, the wide-angle lens tends to compress them. However, it doesn't really matter, because if you drive around with a sort of a telephoto lens, you know, even small differences in the car's movement will make it all move around far too much, and it'll just be a complete mess. And lastly, of course, the shutters on these are only rated for about 200,000 frames, I think, which means that if you're taking a frame a second, that you can wear out the shutter within a couple of days, which is obviously a problem if you want to drive for, you know, a couple of weeks or something, and actually record it almost non-stop. So, what's the alternative? Well, the alternative's what I've got here, which is a standard webcam. This is a Logitech, and the optics aren't too bad. Goes up to about 1024 by 768. I don't actually usually record it that high. I record it about 600 by 800 because you really don't notice it that much on the when you stitch together in the video. And I sort of watered a ant hole, so it's currently monitoring the ants, putting it all back together. And that's tied to a netbook. Now, netbooks typically come in at about the $200–300 mark. I paid about an extra $100 for this one to get the long battery on it. So the battery on this will last for 7–8 hours. So that's fantastic. That means that I can run this setup all night or all day and not have to worry too much about battery. The software that I've got running it is taking a frame. It's called Animated DV. If you can focus for us. Animated DV, there you go. And that's free, and it takes a frame every second and saves that straight to the hard drive. Now that's fantastic, in that means even the smallest of netbooks will have, you know, 100 gigabyte hard drive, so you've basically got unlimited disk space. The one problem that I've found is that if you've got this running once per second for the whole day, that'll get you about 100,000 frames. And once you get up to about 100,000 frames in a directory, just moving 100,000 files around becomes a pain in the arse. So practically, you've got to cut them down into maybe batches of 10,000 or something. So, and the frames on this typically come in at about 10 to 100k, 0.1 of a megabyte, whereas the smallest frames on that are about 2 megabytes. So it's hugely better in almost every respect. The webcam, I've taken most of the mountings off it, but to all intents and purposes, anyone with a webcam and a computer of any sorts could do time-lapse like this. And then once you've got this huge array of files, all sequentially labelled, you need a way of stitching them together in a MPEG or AVI type file, video file. And I actually use Sony Vegas for that, and apparently not all versions of Sony Vegas will do that. But there are other options that you can have for stitching them together. There was a program, or used to be a program, called VideoMac that used to be free for academic purposes, which I used to use for stitching these things together. I'm not sure whether it's still around or not. But anyway, and you get a load of other... The webcam has turned out fantastic in that it's sufficiently light, it's very easy to mount up with elastic bands. I've used this on the telescope. This is what I used to do with time-lapse of Jupiter on the telescope. And it's got other nice features as well, like with the software you can actually sort of zoom in to parts of the frame which are quite useful for focusing. It's got a focus on it, and yeah, for 100, basically anyone with a webcam and a computer could do this. Yeah, the only things that make this nice and portable is the netbook with a relatively long battery life, and well, that's it. That's what makes you portable. My only grouch would be is that when you're doing scenery, the lens is too narrow angle, right? So that lens actually turns out to be pretty poor for doing wide angle stuff. In fact, the camera I'm filming this with has the same problem. Now you can buy things like this. This is a 0.5 times teleconverter. So what this basically does is this increases the field of view by about a factor of 2. So you see that I'm getting both the wheels in, whereas without it, not. Okay, so for the large part, what I do is I just have that sat right in front of the lens of the camcorder, and then have the whole thing mounted up on the dashboard of my car. And that's what I use for doing all the time lapses I drive around the country.